So if you put China and Russia together and you say, well, okay, we're not going to have any dealings with them, well, you can't really then pursue the current path of green technology and transition.
Welcome back to Breakout with Breaking Views, brought to you by PGIM. I'm Peter Fellas, and the acting global editor of Breaking Views, coming to you from London's Canary Wharf and talking to Edward Chancellor. Edward, welcome back. This week, we are talking about the energy transition. Barely a day seems to go by without a company or government making a commitment to shift away from fossil fuels or announcing a big transition, a big investment in renewable energy. Eddie, you've been looking at past energy transitions. So what have you found out?
Over the last 3 centuries, you'd say that the history of capitalism has been built on a succession of energy transitions, starting off with wood as the primary source of energy, then shifting Britain very early on and Europe a bit later to coal as the major source of energy, and then supplanted by oil and petroleum, and then in the 20th century, natural gas. So one has seen, as I say, succession from and a shift into fossil fuels over the last 2 centuries. And as I point out in the piece, although primary energy is only a small reported part of GDP, the energy created suffuses the entire economy. I mean, you and I couldn't be speaking to each other now unless we had a huge amount of electricity and other fossil fuel inputs into our communication.
And so now we're trying to do a big transition to renewable energy, which arguably is an even bigger shift than from wood to coal or coal to oil. But wouldn't you say, I mean, hasn't it been quite successful so far? I mean, I remember 5 or 10 years ago, people said wind or solar power would never be competitive without government subsidies. But now it seems like, at times they are.
First of all, just let's look at where our energy is coming from. There have been concerns about climate change for 30 or 40 years, and yet over the course of this century, the global use of fossil fuels has actually increased by around 20%, according to the BP energy statistics. And our use of fossil fuels still account for 85% of all primary energy. So we haven't really made any significant move, just a few tiny steps. Now, there has been a contribution from renewables, wind and solar in electricity generation. But there's a problem there, which I point out, namely that one of the conditions for a successful shift for a successful energy transition should be to a form of energy that is both generative, has a high energy density, but also is easy to store. The trouble with the renewables is that they are not easy to store. We don't really have the technology to store it in a cost-effective way at the moment, and it's very intermittent. And what we've seen around the world, in I think something like 21 countries over the last year, is the effects of intermittency of the supply of renewable energy on electricity grids from China, Europe, the UK, and the United States. So this lack of storage means that once you could only get up to around 20% of renewables in the grid as a factor contribution before the grids become a bit unstable.
And so then obviously you make this point that sort of on top of all of this now we have a conflict with Russia, which on the one hand I suppose makes it even more imperative in some countries to stop using oil and gas as quickly as possible, but also has cut us off from the supply of lots of materials that are used in the production of solar panels and wind and batteries and wind turbines and so forth. And you also talk about sort of tensions with China. So how does that sort of affect this whole attempted transition?
Peter, last year I wrote a piece for Breaking Views in which I commented on the fact that we were going to need oil and hydrocarbons for the energy transition, that you need, I mean, take for instance, the solar panels made in China are actually made with electricity generated by coal. So that's sort of one problem. But the new problem that occurred to me after the Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the sanctions that imposed on Russia, incidentally not on the raw materials that we're going to talk about, but the danger is that we're now in a position that we want to sanction Russia, but we are dependent on Russia for certain key materials. Now, Russia is the world's largest supplier of platinum group metals, which are used for hybrid cars and into hydrogen fuel cells vehicles. It also is the largest supplier of nickel. Norilsk Nickel, which is a large Russian miner, is the world's largest supplier of battery quality nickel that is used in lithium-ion batteries that go into electric vehicles. So we can't, given Russia's dominance in these the supply of raw materials, and also copper, which, as you're probably aware, is one of them, is used right across the board in this transition to green tech. We can't make that transition very easily without the Russian materials. It gets even worse if we then choose to cut China out of the picture, because China is responsible, produces something like 90% of solar panels, polysilicon. It controls the rare earths that are used to make magnets for wind turbines. So, and as one analyst I cite in the piece says, China is the OPEC of clean tech. So if you put China and Russia together, then and you say, well, okay, we're not going to have any dealings with them. Well, you can't really then pursue the current path of green tech, of green technology and transition. So the sort of thrust of my piece is the policymakers have got a couple of really pressing questions to ask themselves. First of all, are they going to ease up on the transition away from hydrocarbons in order to ease the cost of living crisis, a crisis which, to a large extent, leaving aside any of the monetary problems, a large extent is caused by the surge in the price of fossil fuels? Are they going to ease that? So that's one question. And the other is, what are they going to do about globalization, deglobalization? They either are going to have decarbonization or deglobalisation. If they try to have both, they're going to run into real trouble.
Okay, well, Eddie, sweeping and thought-provoking as ever. You can read Eddie's column on breakingviews.com, and we will be back again soon to talk about more of these types of topics. Thanks very much.